Be honest, you really don't want to pay taxes, but you know you have to. But do you? Well, in today's conversation, we sit down with Dr. Sherry Pill Jackson, who is a retired IRS agent, CPA, and a certified fraud examiner. And she is also the author of a book called How to Stick It to the IRS. This is a conversation you don't want to miss. She's going to share tips and insights to help the middle class get the same tax advantages that corporations and the wealthy experience on a day-to-day basis. If you want to learn how to stick it to the IRS and keep, protect, and grow your income, you definitely want to check out today's show right here on Multifamily Insights. When you think you found a great deal, asking the right questions could be the difference in finding a stud or a dud. Listen, we've put together a new guide to help you out. It's called 7 Questions You Must Ask Before Investing in Apartments. Now, in this guide, you're going to learn how to uncover red flags, quickly identify underwriting risk, vet sponsors and team members, and confirm key assumptions. Now, this is a guide that's going to help you be a better investor, whether you're an active investor or you're a passive investor looking to partner with other operators. Asking better questions is the key to identifying great opportunities. So download this free guide. Go to our website, casmoncapital.com/7 questions. That's the number 7 questions. And you can access this free guide today. To make it easy on you, though, we've put a link in our show notes. So you go to the show notes, you can click that link and access the guide right now. This guide's going to help you make better investment choices, asking the right questions to build your portfolio. So be sure to download it today. Dr. Sherry Pill Jackson is a retired IRS agent, CPA, and certified fraud examiner who has helped over 100,000 individuals and businesses keep, protect, and grow their earnings using her proprietary KPG system. Now, with over 35 years of experience, Sherry is an expert in tax reduction and wealth building. Let's welcome to the show, Dr. Sherry Pill Jackson.
Thank you so much, John, for having me on your show.
Absolutely. Listen, I'm excited to talk to you. You've got a phenomenal, interesting background, and I went over it at a very, very high level. Take 2 minutes and fill in some of those gaps.
Well, I am a retired CPA, a former IRS agent, certified fraud examiner. I help people keep, protect, and grow what they earn. It's easier to operate outside of the system when you're not a CPA because you have all these rules and regulations. But there's so much out there in the world that people need to know about, and I am very free to tell them the things that I've learned. I've learned so much from wealthy people, and I take that information that I've learned from the wealthy people and just share it with middle class people. So that's what I have joy in doing.
Yeah, I love it, right? You know, when we talk about the retired IRS agent and being a certified fraud examiner, for some of our listeners, that sounds real scary. I mean, those are the people we do not want knocking on our door and calling us to dig in everything, right? So just talk to us a little about that background and that experience and maybe some of the things that you've seen in your time in that field.
So I was at the IRS from 1988 to 1995. I left the IRS for family reasons. It was just taking up too much time, and I wanted to be more of a mother, a wife, and started my CPA firm because I already had my CPA when I started working there. I worked in corporate America, and as you know, I've heard on some of your podcasts that corporate America, you have all kinds of issues. It's not about what you know. A lot of times it's about who you know and even what you do with who you know when you're a woman. So that didn't work out. And my father always taught me not to complain. If I didn't like where I was at point A, go to point B. So I left there, saw an ad in the paper for IRS agent, and I figured I was pretty good in math. So I took that job on. I enjoyed what I was doing, but then, I started seeing a lot of disparity in how the IRS treats mom and pop companies versus the corporations. Came home and started my CPA firm, had some big contracts, and then I decided to focus on teaching people how to grow their earnings. It's not something that's really out there. The wealthy know what they know, and they don't really share. So I enjoy sharing the information that I've learned. Some of the pitfalls that I see, especially for the middle class, because they don't know what they don't know, is in the tax arena. We get stuck like quicksand because you earn money, but it's all taken away if you don't know the proper deductions. If you are not up on what the wealthy do to avoid taxes, we're talking about tax avoidance, not tax evasion. But if you don't know what they know to avoid taxes, then you'll continue to pay too much tax. So I teach people that. information. One of the things that's very important is for employees, all of my clients, I tell them you have to start a home-based business. You're not going to get anywhere. There are not a lot of deductions out there for employees at all. You cannot deduct your cell phone. You cannot deduct your internet, your mileage. For every 2 miles that you drive, that's $1 that you're throwing out the window if you don't have a home-based business. So the first thing that I do with them, we start a home-based business, a viable home-based business, something that excites them, not something that's going to be more drudgery, especially if their job is drudgery. And once they start that business, and then I open them up to a whole world of write-offs. You can virtually write off everything but the kitchen sink when you have a business. That's why most entrepreneurs don't pay a lot of taxes and the employees do.
Yeah, I love what you said there, doctor. Like you mentioned, when your experience coming from, having your license as a CPA, going into corporate America, not really liking the culture there. You saw that ad for an IRS agent, did that, left for family reasons, and realized that there were a lot of insights that you were uncovering and you wanted to share with middle-class individuals of some of the strategies that the wealthy are employing, right? And you talked about tax avoidance, not tax evasion, which you certainly don't want to do, but avoidance, right? Understanding the write-offs, understanding that you can start a home-based business and get more deductions that you cannot get as an employee. I want to come right back there, but I want to go back to what you mentioned. You said something about when you were working with the IRS, you realized the discrepancy in how the mom and pop businesses are treated versus the corporations. Can you elaborate?
Yes. So the smaller businesses, we used to call them low-hanging fruit. It doesn't take much to get in there and see that they make mistakes. They love their business. They know their business very well, but they don't know the tax and financial aspect as well. So a lot of them would, make mistakes on their tax return. They don't have the money to hire a CPA or a law firm to get them out of it. And I'll give you the most egregious example that I saw before I left. So, I'm auditing mom and pops when I'm originally at the IRS. I moved up in ranks that I was auditing corporations and partnerships. So on the lower level, those people, if you audit a mom and pop company and they owe $30,000 back, that can devastate their business. That can put a mom and pop out of business. So I didn't like doing that. I tried to help them as much as I could. But when you got to the corporate arena, I audited a company once, and I don't know whether they did it on purpose or not, but they owed about $175,000 back in tax because the tax return was not done correctly. They were taking some liberties that they shouldn't have taken. And the protocol is when you do an audit, you turn your report in. If that company is going to do an appeal, they send their appeal in, it goes to the IRS lawyers, and then it comes back to me to do a rebuttal on their appeal. That was standard protocol. And I turned this case in, and one day, maybe about a month later, I saw the case on my manager's desk, and I'm thinking, I turned that in a month ago. It was actually on his secretary's desk. So I picked it up and looked at it, and it had been closed for under $50,000. And I went to my manager and I said, what's going on here? I didn't even get a chance to look at any kind of an appeal that they did. And he said to me, Sherry, leave it. So right then I knew that the mom and pops don't have a chance. But the ones that have the attorneys and the CPAs to fight, they get off. And I'm going to tell you another true story, John. I talked to some people that work in the IRS, with the IRS, attorneys that are on the outside that work with the IRS attorneys to try to close cases. And literally one of the guys told me, hey, when we were negotiating with the IRS attorneys for this particular case, the IRS attorney said, I'll lower your tax if you can get me a date with that secretary on the second floor with the big breast. So these things happen. And I am very much an advocate for the middle class, especially people who are trying to thrive instead of just surviving day by day. So things like that, they're not good. So I turn around like the Robin Hood and teach the people what the wealthy do so that they can do that and then they can thrive.
Sherry, I appreciate you sharing that. That's incredible. And obviously, I know you're talking about, a period in time, but just to hear some of those practices, I think is, still disturbing and somewhat shocking. You talked about being able to teach, the middle class, those mom and pop investors, those entrepreneurs, how to take advantage of some of the same tax benefits that the wealthy do. Let's talk about that more, right? For that mom and pop person who doesn't have the same capacity to compete with the corporations, what are some things that they could be doing in the business that are common mistakes you see on a day-to-day basis?
With 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 regard to taxes, the first thing that I see that's always a detriment is they don't keep their records. They'll drive along and let the records fly out to the window in the summer and whatever. And then they expect that if they get audited, then, oh, I can use my debit card statements and my credit card statements. Well, they are shocked when they find out that that does not count at all. You cannot use your debit and credit card statements. Now, you have to have your receipts. So if you say, okay, I went to Staples and I bought some paper, and the IRS will say, well, we don't know what you bought. You could have bought anything from there. So keeping the receipts has been the biggest issue that I've had with the small businesses. I actually do help people that are being audited by the IRS. That's one of my joys because I help them behind the scenes and, their report comes out and the IRS says, who helped you? Because, I really make sure that they don't get taken advantage of. Most people are afraid of the IRS. So in those cases, they will acquiesce to any number that's given. And I'm like, no, you actually had this receipt. Let's go back. Let's find the records. You can actually recreate records, especially when you have, let's say mileage. Get your calendar out for that year and recreate your mileage. That is all legal. So the documentation. Now there are apps out there. I'm not one big on apps, but people will put the receipt in an app and then it may transfer into QuickBooks or some other software. The other thing that you can do is just keep your receipts. And I know that they have that disappearing ink on all the receipts now. So what I have them do if they're going to keep the receipts is make a copy of the receipt. That copy is going to be there and you staple the original. So even if that original fades, you have a copy of it. So there are two options, but bottom line is you have to keep your receipts.
Yeah, biggest thing, keep your receipts. It's funny, when I was in corporate, that was the thing, right? We always had to do our receipts for reimbursement. And I hated it. It was one of the things where when I got to the point where I had an assistant, I'm like, yes, here's a bag full of receipts. I don't recall where I went or when I went to, but once a month, someone would sit down and kind of help me do that because it was, it would just take up so much of my time. It just felt so annoying. So I can imagine how many small business owners just, end up throwing those things away. And to your point, just assume, well, it's on my credit card statement or my debit card statement. When we just pull that out, your point is we have to actually have the receipt. So it's a good reminder. Even if you didn't know, it's a reminder to stay true to that principle. There's definitely apps that you can use, but having those receipts is going to be critical. So appreciate you sharing that. Talk to us more about some of the work you do, right? You've helped a lot of investors, a lot of owners. I know you also wrote a book. So let's talk about that. How to Escape the Rat Race. Tell us more there.
So I have about 10 books and How to Stick It to the IRS. Confessions from a Former Insider is my number one seller.
We love that right there. That might be the title of this episode, How to Stick It to the
Yes.
IRS.
Yes. And then How to Escape the Rat Race basically goes through what I call my KPG system. That means keep, protect, and grow what you earn. We start out talking about decreasing expenses. We spend millions of dollars, John, every year on conspicuous consumption. I would talk about the Nike tennis shoes, but now all the stuff is coming out about the Birkin bags and the fact that those things are being made for pennies on the dollar and people are paying thousands of dollars for it. We need to stop doing that. So I talk in How to Escape the Rat Race about how to sensibly reduce your expenses. Simple things like, if you don't have money, you don't need to be shopping in needless markup. I mean, Neiman Marcus. You need to go to the thrift store and get some clothes. You need to make sure that your heating and air conditioning is not too much. For example, I have a 4-story house. It's me in this house, and I take heaters from room to room in the winter because I don't need to be heating Georgia. But in the summertime, I actually, when I was broke, I made a portable air conditioner out of one of those styrofoam coolers. I put 18 bottles of water in it. I put 2 holes in the top of it. I stuck a fan down in the top of it, so it could blow down on the the frozen water. And then I put one of those little nozzles that you might see on your dryer, and it would cool me, and I would take it from room to room if I needed to. The hardest part about that was taking the 18 bottles of water out when they were unfrozen and putting more in. But you have to, desperate times call for desperate measures, and you have to live like no one else so that later you can live like no one else. So now I'm at a point where I don't have to deal with that. I still go to the thrift store sometimes, but you want to be at a point where you can do what you want to do, when you want to do it, with whoever you want to do it, with no concern for money. In order to get to that point, you have to do some things to decrease your expenses. Then the next thing is eliminating debt. We need to get rid of debt. Debt tethers us, and we are not free. So I'm talking about bad debt. Good debt, of course, is getting the loans for the properties and things like that. But I'm talking about spending money on credit cards for furniture and the horrible interest rates. Just getting rid of debt. The next thing is increasing income, and of course, my thing is starting a home-based business. I don't necessarily advocate for starting a business outside of the home because you have another mortgage or another rent aside from where you live. Back in the 1930s, and especially in New York, people had their businesses and then they would go upstairs at night and they lived up there. So your business was downstairs and your home was upstairs. And this is what I'm talking about, having a home-based business so that you don't have to pay an extra mortgage, so that you can write off everything but the kitchen sink. And then once you start making money, not spending that money on, again, conspicuous consumption, like buying a whole bunch of cars and flat screen TVs, but taking that money, investing it back into the business, and taking some of it to grow your wealth. So I don't invest in anything that can disappear in the blink of an eye. I invest in physical silver, physical gold, and real estate. So if you start building your business and taking money aside, then you can start building that wealth. And I listened to one of your podcasts. It caught me. It said how to eliminate taxes, not just defer them, with Mark Willis. Well, I wanted to hear what he had to say. And sure enough, he's doing the same thing I'm doing with the infinite banking policies. So I learned about those policies. I take extra money, put it into the policy, and take that and get real estate. So these are things that I'm teaching the middle class people so that they can move up and they can have a legacy for their families.
Doctor, I love what you talked about, and specifically the cadence of the order, right? So depending on where you're at, step one is you got to just cut the bleeding, right? You got to look at your expenses and figure out how to save more money. So that could be making certain sacrifices. You got really, really inventive, right? You display some ingenuity to go out there and say, all right, hey, how do we save on this heat? How do we save on AC? How do we cut down on some of these expenses, right? But you got to be able to save enough money. And that's step one. You got to look at, you're in a situation where you just don't have enough money at the end of the month. How do you cut down those expenses? And you might have to make some sacrifices that are uncomfortable to start. But you know what? That's what you got to do. But you start there. Step two, you start to look at the taxes, right? How much are you giving Uncle Sam? I had an interview, forgot the guest, but he said something I love. He's like, that the government is an unintended investor. And when you're going out there, for us, we're buying multifamily properties and we've got our investors who we want to deliver return to. Uncle Sam's right there alongside them, got their hand out for their cut. And none of us really want to pay this investor, but he's always right there along for the ride. So how do you mitigate how much you have to give to Uncle Sam? And then the third part of that gets into growing your income, right? How can you make more money, whether it's getting a promotion at your job or just getting more income? And then last, starting that business, right? That home-based business. So you're not necessarily taking on more costs with the mortgage or rent payments to another location, but really that home-based business so you can start to generate more money while also taking further advantage of the tax code. And I love kind of that approach because now you start to create an ecosystem where you are getting out of the rat race. You are starting to change your lifestyle. And depending on where you're at, you know what you really need to focus on. For those people who are at the investing phase, right? They're starting to invest more in real estate. You started to talk about infinite banking and some of the strategies there. Can you just talk about maybe some other strategies that maybe some folks aren't aware of that you really think the middle class should be more aware of?
They need to be aware of what kind of business structure they need to start. So a lot of them start off, of course, is solopreneurs, entrepreneurs that are filing a Schedule C. Some of them want to start out with a corporation, S Corp, C Corp, partnership. They need to really get somebody to make them understand what's best for them. Everybody doesn't need to be a corporation. I've had people start out with being a corporation and don't realize how expensive it is and how much work it takes. You have to have your minutes for your board of directors. You have to have a board of directors. And the scariest thing is you cannot pierce the corporate veil. What I mean by that is when you're a small business and you're just a sole proprietor, it doesn't matter. You might go to the store and you might spend a little bit of money out of the company account. You cannot do that as an S corp or C corp. You have pierced the corporate veil. You cannot mingle money. You cannot take the corporate account and go to, let's say, to the farmer's market and buy your groceries for the week. It has to stay separate. So there's a lot more work when you have a corporation. So some small businesses need to stay, in the sole proprietorship arena so that they can get acclimated to having that separate business. Yes, have a separate bank account. Yes, have an EIN, but don't necessarily jump into the corporate space immediately. Another thing is you don't have to necessarily have your business where you are. I only have one business that has a footprint in Georgia. For anonymity purposes, I have businesses in other states like Wyoming and Nevada and New Mexico because I don't want anybody hunting me down. This is the United States of America. We have 5% of the world's population, but we have 70% of the world's lawsuits. There are more lawsuits. There are more lawyers in Jacksonville, Florida than the whole of Japan. And so you have a very, very high chance of being sued, especially if you're in a profession that has a lot of legal exposure. So that, as far as the protect, when I say keep, protect, and grow, protecting what you earn is very important. So you want to make sure that, even if you have a company, let's say if you set it up in another area like Wyoming, if someone sues, if they do find out that your company is in Wyoming, once they look in your state and they don't see you, and if they search, which they usually don't, and find that you're in Wyoming and they want to sue you, they have to hire a Wyoming lawyer. So there's a lot of things when I was an IRS agent, I would look at a company as an onion. And if I peel the onion back just a little bit and I see your face, you're really not protected. But there were some companies that I peel back until there was nothing there. They're protected. They have their assets not in their names. Now, from what I understand, the largest, most expensive houses in the Las Vegas, Henderson area are not in individual names. They're in company names. So these are strategies that people use to make sure that their assets are protected. And it's very important. Some of the other strategies that I've seen as far as companies to get more income is, I don't know if you're familiar, you probably are with the Augusta rule. If you have a corporation, your corporation can lease your house out for 14 days out of the year at reasonable rates, but that money is deductible on the corporate tax return, and you get to take in that money tax-free. I have a client right now that's about to take in over $22,000 because he lives in an upscale neighborhood, and his corporation is renting every month, and then 2 extra meetings, his home, and they're going to meet at his home and meet all day. And then he's going to have $22,000 some odd dollars in his pocket and a deduction for the corporation. So these are some of the things that wealthy people know about that we don't know about.
I love it. Lots of great information there. And I think it's to your point. It's understanding how all of this adds up. And I love your mantra, right? Keep, protect, grow. And that protect is really important. And some of that is legal structure. Where do you set up the entity? That anonymity, anonymous, we want to be anonymous as well. So all these things are important when you're trying to protect yourself because you don't want someone to be able to go after you personally. Can you just talk a little bit more about that aspect of it? Because I don't know if folks fully embrace that. And I mean, that quote you gave about, America having 5% of the world's population, but 70% of the world's attorneys, I think that should be an eye opener for many people. But just elaborate a little bit more about the importance of protecting ourselves when it comes to kind of the creation of these assets.
So it started back when the woman spilled some coffee from McDonald's and got that big, our legal system has become the new lottery. So I remember when I started driving, maybe 2 or 3 times, somebody bumped me in the back or I bumped them in the back. We got out, looked, there was no damage, move on. That won't happen these days. They will get out and scream and holler, and especially if you're driving a BMW or Benz, they're going to, just scream and holler, call the ambulance, and you just don't want to be sued. So we have to think like a chess player. what can I do to make sure that they don't get my king? And going into it, first of all, you have to have great insurance. I have liability insurance, but I also have errors and omissions insurance to make sure that if anybody says I gave them bad advice, then I'm covered. And besides the insurance, you have to have assurance. I make sure that my clients have 6 months worth of expenses saved up so that if some things happen, they've got 6 months worth of expenses and they can pay them while they figure it out. And then with the lawsuits, it's just you become a target when you start to grow. When people see that you are becoming wealthy, regardless of whether it's jealousy or just, that deep pocket theory, they try to get your money. So you must, aside from having insurance and assurance, you must make sure that your legal structuring is on point and that you're protected. There are trust and foundations that you can put together, like the Rockefellers and like Warren Buffett, that make sure that the money that goes into your company is protected and then even not taxable after a while. That's a lot to get into, but you've heard that Warren Buffett pays less taxes than his secretary. And it's probably true because the wealthy know how to set up structures. Warren Buffett said, and also some of the other ones, Zuckerberg say, they're not leaving their children any money. Well, no, their children have foundations. And when you transfer stock from one foundation or one company to another foundation, then that person is not paying tax. They get to live out of that entity as a manager. These are things that I say, wow, these things aren't rocket science, but we just don't know about them.
Yeah, lots of great information there. I push people to continue to learn about these different strategies, figure out what makes sense for you based on where you're at in your journey, because there's a lot of great intel there. And I'm sure you've got more insights in your book. We talked about the one, but How to Stick It to the IRS is one that I love that title. And I'm sure folks will certainly want to check that out. For folks that do want to learn more, I know you've got some great information on your website. You can go to sherrypilljackson.com and get access to some of that content there. Right now, we're going to transition to our round of insights. They say you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So if you want to grow as a multifamily investor, you have to spend more time with other multifamily investors. And an easy way to do that is to join our apartment investing mastermind group today. Just go to casmoncapital.com and click on the mastermind button. Now, as a part of this group, you'll get access to expert trainings, group coaching calls, industry news and updates, as well as all of our webinars and workshops, including our 3-hour workshop on raising capital. Again, if you want to be around other multifamily investors that can help you scale your portfolio today and grow your network, make sure you're a part of the Apartment Investing Mastermind. Just go to casmoncapital.com and click on the Mastermind button today. All right, Dr. Sherry, give me a failure or an apparent failure that set you up for later success.
So after COVID, I tried to start doing live events again. And my first one was, I thought, a bomb. I only had a handful of people there after I put so much effort into it. And I was used to having 60, 70 people. And I thought it was a complete failure. But one of those people signed up to be a premium client, and they're still with me. So that was something to turn around from a failure into a win.
Love it. Give me a digital or mobile resource you recommend for our listeners.
Well, as far as taxes are concerned, there's a website or an application called freetaxusa.com. And Free Tax USA will let you do the federal for free, and your state taxes are $15. And if you don't have state taxes, then the whole thing is free. So I've been using that and have people using that. It carries over your information every year, and it's just, your federal is free.
All right. Give me the book you've recommended or gifted the most in the last year.
Good. So I've co-authored a book with my mentor, Myron Golden, and the book is called Increase Your Income and Reduce Your Taxes. So he's a millionaire. He knows how to make your money, and I know how to make sure you don't have to give Uncle Sam even half of it.
All right, we'll check that one out as well. Give me a daily habit that helps you stay focused on your goals.
I get up and make sure that I meditate and make sure that I'm centered in the morning. Make sure that I tell myself, you're not running anything with your mouth. Get up and do what you're supposed to do today. Leave the rest of it behind. Don't get stressed out.
Give me your number one insight for keeping, protecting, and growing your income.
Making sure that you watch your money on a daily basis. Make sure that you are not spending what you do not have.
I love it. You mentioned that you're in Atlanta, so let's go in a different direction. Give us your favorite place to grab a bite to eat.
Ooh, so many because I like to eat out. I would say I love Marciano's and I love Papados, but there's a small restaurant called The Beautiful, and it's on Cascade Road, and they have the best blackberry cobbler ever.
The Beautiful it is.
So
Well, Dr.
beautiful.
Sherry, I loved our conversation today. You talked about your journey getting into being a CPA, working in corporate, working for the IRS, and then deciding you want to help other people learn how to take advantage of the tax code the same way the wealthy do it, and giving us some insights on some things we can do, thinking about launching the small home-based business so that you can take advantage of some of the write-offs and some of the different advantages that are there, but also recognizing that, again, we talk about that keep, protect, and grow approach. It's all about, one, protecting what you have first and foremost, living below your means, but then being able to invest in yourself and growing and scaling with the right investments as well. Again, for folks that want to learn more, they can check out your website, sherrypilljackson.com. I want to thank you again for being a great guest and coming on Multifamily Insights. We look forward to staying in touch with you, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you for having me, John.